Good morning, this is Tracy Drummond. I'm here today with Dean Girardot, and we are going to be doing an oral history interview for the archives of the International Association of Machinists and Aerospace Workers, which is housed at the Southern Labor Archives in Atlanta. Today is the 13th of August, 2012, and we are in Lady Lake, Florida. Good morning.
Good morning.
How are you today?
I'm fine, thank you.
Good. Thank you for agreeing to participate in the Retirees Oral History Project. I will get started by asking you, where were you born? Where are you from?
I was born in Denver, Colorado in 1934. I'm a product of the Depression.
Okay.
And had a great childhood. My folks, during the winter, we would winter in Colorado, and then in the early spring we went out to Oregon, where my dad worked as a lumberjack, and my sister and I, we all lived in the camp, which was a one-room shack on skids, so they could move it from place to place. We did that for we'd be there for a couple of months, and then we'd go down to the hop fields where my mom would pick hops and my dad would spray them with DDT, which is another story. But my sister and I loved that because we had a tent to live in then, but the tents had wood floors and wood all around the side, and while my folks were in the hop fields, we'd be in daycare, and we had fresh orange juice and chocolate chip cookies, so I was in heaven at that point.
So how many years
We
did
did
you do
that
that?
up until World War II, and then
Okay.
my dad, of course, went off to the war, and then that after the war, he got jobs in the Denver area, and that's where he stayed, and that's where I grew up. In fact, I didn't know anything about a union until he came back from the service, and his first job was delivering beer around Denver, worked for a beer distributor. And the Teamsters tried to organize the distributorship, and he signed one of their cards and went to work one day, and a couple hours later he was back because he got fired. They fired all of those they must have had someone that squealed on them.
Right.
Because they fired all those that signed cards. Of course, we were devastated here. No job, no money. Was living in a housing project, and we were hopeful that we'd get out of that pretty soon. But fortunately, found another job, and,
Okay.
right quick.
Okay, well, let's step back a second. What kind of education were you getting moving back and forth? And
Well, we
living
always
there?
schooled in Denver
Okay.
because we'd be back in time for school to start.
Okay.
We wouldn't leave until after school was
Okay.
out.
And were your parents able to find work when they came back to Denver for the winters?
My mom never worked much, but except during the war, she worked at a rubber plant. But my dad always was able to find odd jobs. He'd drive a cab or be a bellhop or things like that till after the war. But yeah, he was always able to find something to do.
Okay. Well, in general in Denver, what were feelings about unions? Because once your dad had tried to join the Teamsters and was fired, and fortunately was able to find another job pretty quickly. What did that sort of wake up the family to sort of overall sentiment toward unions, or?
Well, I think he always leaned somewhat toward them, but until I was in junior high school, the jobs he had were non-union. They drove truck around Colorado delivering gas and oil and that sort of thing. And then he got a job with Denver and Chicago Trucking, which was organized by the Teamsters. And for the first time, we were able to have health and welfare, which we'd never had insurance before. We had that, and he also had a pension. And so that really kind of, and then I would work during the summers when I got a little older. And it was one job I remember. In fact, I joined the laborers. They must not have had any age limit because I was only about 15 years old, working curb and gutter. And streets really, but I was on the curb and gutter. And I decided I really needed to find a better union job, and that laboring wasn't my idea. So when I graduated from high school, there was a brewery just west of where we lived, Coors Brewery, that was unionized, and so I got a job there, and that's where I became associated with the brewery workers.
Okay.
And they were also one of the better paying jobs around.
Well, let me ask you, and you said your mom worked during the war.
She worked at Gates Rubber Company, which made tires and any rubber product for the war industry. And we lived in by that time my youngest sister had come around too, so there was three of us, and she would work the swing shift from 3 to midnight so that my older sister could kind of watch over us until she got home.
Okay. And y'all were still in school during this time?
Oh yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so what was expected of a young man growing up in Denver to working class parents in terms of your education? What was school like for you?
Well, I had a great time. I wasn't the greatest student because I had too much fun, but my folks expected us to, finish high school, and of course they would have liked us to go on to college. It didn't work out, even though I had scholarships, not because of my study ability, but my athletic ability. But for whatever reason, chose to enter the workforce. But they wanted us to do better than them as far as. Neither one of them graduated from high school. My mother got through the 10th grade. My dad graduated from what they call opportunity school, and that's he got a trade. I'm not sure what trade he got. I think a mechanic, because he was a wonderful mechanic. But they expected us to go to school each day and get a decent education and become a part of America's middle class, because at that point, by the time I got to high school, we finally did get out of the projects. My dad was able to buy a house on the GI Bill, the only house that they ever owned. They both lived in it and died in it, but it was, I'll never forget, 900 square feet, 3 bedrooms, 1 bath, had a living room and a kitchen, and we thought we were in heaven. That was a castle to us.
And how long was your dad gone?
He was 3 years.
3 years?
Mm-hmm. He was in the Pacific. In fact, they were getting ready for the invasion of Japan when Truman dropped the atomic bomb. Mm-hmm. So they unloaded the ships, and not long after that, he was back home.
Do you know that machinists made the bomb? Did you know that
I did not
in Oak Ridge, Tennessee?
I didn't know that then.
Well,
yeah.
In Oak Ridge, Tennessee, Local Lodge 480, they were responsible for making components that then I went somewhere else, and the bomb was put together.
In fact, when I worked for the machinist, I used to have to go out to Pantex, which is in Amarillo, Texas. That's where all of our nuclear stuff is. The final assembly of it is there.
So high school's over for you. You've graduated, and what can I ask? Just out of curiosity, for your sisters, was it expected that they would go to school, or that they would become homemakers, or? Well,
that they would certainly finish high school, and my oldest sister actually enrolled at Regis College in Denver, but for whatever reason, she decided she was going to join the Navy, which she did. And she went to Great Lakes Training Center outside of Chicago. And so she was in the Navy about 4 years, married while she was in the Navy, and just stayed in that area, really.
Okay. And your other sister?
My other sister graduated high school, stayed in Denver, still in Denver.
Still in Denver?
Didn't go any further. She married and had 3 children. She's still in Denver.
Okay. So this gets us up to the point where you get your first job. You've graduated, and you get your first job with the brewery.
Right, Coors Brewery, Golden, Colorado.
And what were some of your duties when going into that job?
Well, I started out on the cleanup crew, which is terrible. have to crawl inside a caustic laden soaker and clean all the glass out of it. But I soon graduated from that, and I really ended up working in what they call the malt house. Beer is made of actually 3 ingredients: barley, which is the grain, hops and yeast and water. That's it. That's what beer is made of. And Coors owned a bunch of barley farms in the Dakotas and in that area up in there, and so that would come down to the brewery, and then you have to convert it from. Let me get this straight. It's originally a grain, starch or sugar, I don't know, but anyhow, you convert it from one to the other, and then when they boil it, and to make a long story short, when the beer is made, before you put the yeast in, it's real sweet because of the sugar content that's in it. And then you put it into the fermenting cellars, you inject yeast into it, and that's the yeast digests the sugar and puts the alcohol in the beer. And then it sets for a while, and then they bottle it, can it, keg it, whatever they want to do with it. And so that's where I worked, and I actually got to know Adolf Coors II because I had to work weekends, and he would come in, and he was an interesting old man, but he liked to talk. And at that time, Coors was only in like about 13 states. And I asked him one day, why don't you, everybody likes your beer, why don't you go national? He said, beer drinkers are fickle. He said, if I can't flood a market, I won't go to it, because if they can't get they like my beer and they can't get it one day, they'll just switch to another one and stay with that one. He said, so I'll never go until I have the capacity to be able to get enough beer to where I go. And there's a bit of that family was, I don't know what descent you are, but a typical German family, were very strong-willed. And Adolf II was getting ready to retire, and it was all family-owned at that time. Now it's public, but it was family-owned. And the oldest son, Adolf III, was taken over, and he had a terrible speech impediment. If he got excited, he just couldn't talk. I mean, he just come out. But there was a guy that escaped from a New Mexico prison, kidnapped him, and eventually murdered him, which was pretty tragic for that family. But in about that time, the pattern in the contract, by then I'd become a shop steward and was pretty active in the brewery workers. And the pattern had been in negotiations a quarter over 2 years in wages. 10 cents the first year, 15 cents the second year. That'd been the pattern. And this year we were going to break that pattern. It was going to be 15 and 15. Well, anyone that knew the Coors family, they were pretty tough. But so we went on a long strike, about a 117-day strike. And
do you know about what year that was?
Yeah, it would have been
maybe around 52?
1960.
Oh,
no, it would have been, wait a minute. 52, 53, 54. It'd be about 1956.
Okay.
And when we settled the strike, we settled for 10 and 15, but we did get a little better health and welfare and a little better pension out of the deal, but we also lost a bunch of jobs out of it. The Denver warehouse, they closed it and subbed it out. But I didn't go back to work Coors after that. I went to work for the International at that point, and they sent me to Atlanta, Georgia, to organize a Carling brewery there. And
well, let's back up a little before we get to Atlanta. So how soon after you started at the brewery did you join the union? Was it already in place? Was it already established?
The union was there. As soon As soon as my probationary period was up, I joined.
Okay. And it was the Brewery Workers
Brewery Workers
International
local
Union.
International Union. It was local 366.
Who did they eventually merge with? Because I know
Teamsters.
Teamsters. Okay. Okay. Because I know that the Brewery Workers are no longer
Yeah,
an
they're
active,
they're no longer in existence.
an active union.
They're
Okay.
the Teamsters now.
Okay. And so your dad had briefly joined the union. Before he but then was fired almost immediately. But did you get support from your parents when you joined the
Oh
union?
yeah, sure. Yeah, they were happy for me. Happy, one, that I got a decent job, and two, that I was becoming active in the union.
Good. And what was just in general in Denver at that time? Because some parts of the country it's more difficult to organize, and in some places there's very strong anti-union sentiment, depending on where you are.
Right.
So just in general in Denver, like, was it a more progressive city?
It was
in
more
terms
progressive, yes. It wasn't bad. In fact, Colorado, of course, did not have right to work laws, so you could have union shops in Colorado. And Colorado is where the Ludlow massacre happened.
Mm-hmm.
That was, coal mining. Such a fact, there's a plaque in Ludlow, not a plaque, but a memorial about the massacre. But they were pretty open-minded about unions after that.
Okay. And you started out cleaning, you said.
Yeah, I
and
was on the
quickly,
cleanup crew.
And quickly moved up, you said, to the Hophaus?
No, the malt house.
The malt house,
That's
sorry,
what they
sorry,
called it.
okay.
It's where the grain, where you would germinate the grain, turn it from starch to sugar, or from sugar to starch. Now, why they go through that process, I don't have any idea, because once you boil it, you turn it back to sugar.
Okay.
But I think you get more sugar out of it that way, and that's why they did it.
And how long did it take you to become active in the union?
Oh, I was there probably about a year before I became a shop steward.
Okay, so pretty quickly after joining. And was there good turnout at the meetings at that point? Did you have
Pretty good.
when you'd have just a regular, like a general meeting, you'd have a lot of folks come?
They at our regular monthly meetings, we'd have, you never have great turnouts.
Right.
They have too many. Although at that time there wasn't a lot going on. We didn't have television even at that time yet. Well, we may have had television, may have just gotten there, but we had pretty good turnouts. I'd say 30-40% of the membership would show up at local lodge meetings because they'd always have a little beer afterwards as well.
Right.
Play a little cards.
And so what were some of the issues you would get as shop steward? Like, what were some of the common issues at the brewery?
Well, let me think back. That's been a long time ago. And actually, it was a pretty smooth operation. Most of the issues were issues between employees, really. Or if they thought maybe the company wasn't living up to the certain items in the contract, not pay or that sort of thing, but maybe overtime issues, or maybe ways of progression, getting from one job to the other. You had a job bidding process, and that usually was more, what we had more problems with was company may disqualify you because they didn't think you was qualified for the job.
Okay.
And that would always be an issue.
And out of curiosity, was it a closed shop or an open shop?
Well, it was a union shop.
Okay.
It wasn't the difference between closed shop. Closed shop you have to join.
Mm-hmm.
A union shop you do join, but you don't have to become a member.
Okay. Okay.
But the closed shop you actually have to be a member before you go to work.
Okay. Okay. And what percentage of the brewery do you think was organized?
Oh, it's 100%.
100%? Okay. Okay.
I mean, it was a union shop,
Mm-hmm.
but I mean, we didn't have any that would pay their dues and not join.
Okay.
They would all join.
Okay. Okay.
But under a union shop, you can pay your dues, but you don't have to join the union.
Okay. So in 1956, you went to work in 54, and 2 years later is when you had the big strike.
Yeah. Well, I
And-
actually went to work there in 52.
Oh, 52? Okay.
Or did I put 54? I'm
Yes,
sorry,
yes.
52. Yeah.
52, and
After I got
then,
out of high school.
and 4 years later, the big strike.
Mhm.
So what was it like being on, how long did the strike last?
119 days.
119 days, so
Yeah.
gosh, almost 3 whole months.
Yeah.
No, 4 months.
Yeah.
Wow. So what was it like being on strike?
Well, for me, it was interesting because the sheriff of Jefferson County, which is where Golden is, was, in fact, there's a couple of books about him. His name is Art Warmuth, and he was a survivor of the Bataan Death March. In fact, he was a hero of it. Supposedly killed 118 Japs by himself.
Wow.
Which, he was a little bitty guy. I told him the only way he killed that number of people, he talked them to death, because he was the talkingest fool I've ever seen. But Coors actually pretty much owned Golden, Colorado. That's the town they were in. There was
Okay.
2 things there: Colorado School of Mines, which the Coors was on the Board of Regents, and the Brewery.
What's the School of Mines?
It's one of the better known Colorado School of Mines. It's a college for, it turns out, mining engineers.
Okay.
And it's
Okay.
one of the better known engineering schools for mines that you can find.
That's fascinating. I had no idea that there would be schools devoted solely to
Yeah, strictly
mining
for mining
Okay.
engineering.
Okay.
And they passed a no picketing ordinance in Golden, which of course is not constitutional, and of course we tested it.
Yeah.
And every time I went down on the picket line, the old sheriff nailed me and would give me a summons. And I had the Supreme Court not overruled that, I probably would have been in prison for about 10 years. Because I could just walk near there and he'd get me.
And how do you say his last name is Warmuth?
Yeah, let's see if I don't think I know how to spell Warmuth, Wormath, I think, but just look up the Bataan Death March and you'll
Okay.
find Art Warmuth. He's,
Okay. Sure thing.
yeah, he was the hero of it.
Okay. But not of Golden.
Well, actually, I kind of liked the guy, and he liked me. It was just that it was like a game,
Mhm.
really. I think he knew nothing was going to come of any of this, and I knew I wasn't going to jail. At least I had faith in our Constitution that I had the right to
Right.
assemble. And even in the court system there, I know one day. Well, I was sent out to California to boycott, get the locals in California, because that was one of Coors' biggest sales, to boycott Coors as long as we were on strike.
Okay.
And I know you never heard of this guy either, Joe Pine. He was probably the Howard Stern of radio and television before Howard Stern ever came around. But he was a real, loved unions, and while I was out there, he wanted me to, he had a half-hour program. It was on ABC in Burbank there, each Sunday. And it was a talk show type thing. And so I appeared on his show. I had 15 minutes, and then and Joe Pine was Jewish. And in the next 15 minutes, I'm glad they were the next, so I could get out of there. But it was, it was an anti-Jewish group. I can't even recall who they were now. But and it was scripted, really. He gave me the questions that he was going to ask, and I could come up with my answers. But the funniest part, I was like maybe 20, 21 years old at that time, and was pretty young, looked pretty young. And he didn't want a young-looking guy on his show, so he told me to show up like an hour before, and they take me in the makeup studio, and they put all this glunk on me, and I got gray hair. Now I had a lot of hair then, but now I got gray in my sideburns on, and really I did look like I was in my 40s after that. But we go on the air and we get through the program, and everything's fine. Now I think at least they're going to take me back in there and get all this stuff off wrong. They dump you out the door. Anyhow, that's just an aside. And when I came back and they had a court case where we had a few scabs that went in, and one guy came out and he tried to run over one of our pickets. And so we were in this court, and I'm not even involved. I'm just sitting there in the courtroom, and I notice this old judge keeps looking at me, and I'm just sitting there. Pretty soon he's banging his gavel, he's pointing his finger. He says, "You young man," he said, "if you make one more gesture in this court, I'm going to cite you for contempt of court." And I'm thinking, I'm not doing anything. I'm just sitting here. It's my right to sit here. And make a long story short, this one finally, he throws me out of the courtroom after about the third time, saying that I'm making gestures, which I was doing nothing, believe me. And so the sheriff, and I went outside and was out there for a while. And he came out and he says, "You better get out of here. That guy's going to put you in jail." I said, "I was doing nothing. I have no reason to leave." And he said, "Well, I'm just warning you." I said, "Okay." So after the trial, then the sheriff comes back out and says, "Judge wants me to bring you back in." I said, "Okay." Of course, our attorney was there. And so the judge says, "I'm going to give you one chance. You apologize and I'll let you go." And I said, I don't owe you an apology." "Okay, you're going to jail." And so our attorney says, "Fine, we'll put up bond." And the guy can't find the forms. And he keeps telling me, "Just apologize." And the last thing he says, and I started to say, "I'm sorry, but I don't owe you an apology." And I said, "I'm sorry." Case dismissed, case dismissed. So it was a funny atmosphere. It was serious, but there was also some funny times with it.
Were y'all prepared with a strike fund?
We did have...
Because that's a long time to be on strike.
Yeah, the international, and I can't... At that time, it was like maybe about $25 a week or something like that. But they had a food bank, and the strikers could come and get food. And also, they could bring their utility bills, and we'd pay their utility bills.
Okay.
I don't think there were any arrangements for mortgage payments or rent payments and that sort of thing. But we would also go to, places and try to get them to defer, various banks and stuff, try to get them to defer payments until after the strike was over.
And did your efforts to get boycotts, or to have people boycott, did that affect Coors? Did enough people support the strike that it sort of make the company feel some pressure?
Well, I think it made them feel pressure. There's no question about that. Did it make them, change their mind too much? Probably not. They're pretty hard-headed people, but yeah, it certainly affected the bottom line, and I think that's probably why it was a face-saving thing for them to do something on health and welfare and pension to get us back. They were never going to cave on the wages because they made that a public thing, and once they did that, they weren't going to cave.
Okay. So after the strike was settled and everybody went back to work, the atmosphere changed? Was it different going back in, or did it get back to normal pretty quickly, or?
Well, there was tension, and that tension remained. In fact, there's more to the story after I left, but things kind of calmed down, and it was workable, and everybody was back working, and that went on for into the 60s, sometime into the 60s. And it went on till after the brewery workers finally merged with the Teamsters, which was their bitter enemy, but they merged with them. But this local 366 would merge. They pulled out and became what they call a DALU, directly affiliated with the AFLCIO.
Okay.
And it was because I know that I was working for the AFLCIO and the AFLCIO was servicing these people, and they were getting ready to have another strike. And I told the regional director at that time, I said, "You're crazy." I said, because the issue was really, it was more of a civil rights issue than an issue that really pertained to all of the folks there. I mean, it was a good issue, but it really wasn't an issue to strike that brewery over. And I told him, I said, they're not going to get, you're going to end up losing, which they did. They lost the union, and I don't know whether Coors is organized now or not, but they decertified after that, never won that strike. So Coors ended up non-union.
Okay, but before that, the brewery workers became you said a delude?
Well, the local, just that local.
Just that local.
Yeah,
because they didn't want to join the Teamsters.
They wouldn't join the Teamsters, so the AFLCIO said, "Okay, we'll give you a charter, a directly affiliated local unions." Let's go.
Can you how do you spell delude?
Well, that's the initials for directly affiliated local union. DALU.
Okay, I
It's
see.
just initials. It's an acronym. It just stands for directly affiliated local union.
And even after the strike, you were there for 6 more years.
Well, no, I not at Coors. After
Not
the
at
strike, I went to work for the International at that point.
Okay.
And then they moved me to Atlanta, Georgia to organize a Carling brewery that the Teamsters were trying to organize as well.
But after the strike, because you were shop steward, did you ever move up to be an elected officer of the local while you were still there?
No, just
okay.
a shop steward. That was it.
Okay, and but I guess they saw something in you, and so they offered you. The International offered you a job. So tell me about that. And what year was that?
Well, it would have been 50. When was the strike?
The strike was 56.
It would have been 56.
Okay, so later in 56.
Yeah, it would have been in the, well, they wanted me to go to Atlanta and organize the Carling Brewery.
And was Carling a company that's no longer around?
Yeah, Carling at that time was the 4th leading brewery in the country. It's a Canadian operation. And the only reason, I don't know how they got there, because their beer was the worst. 7 days from the day you ground the barley until it hit the road, 7 days. That was it, man. It was terrible beer. But anyhow, Eddie Fisher and Debbie Reynolds were their advertising folks, and but they were really expanding then. They had 4 breweries then. Their main brewery was in Cleveland, and they were building this one in Atlanta, which the brewery probably lasted 6 years there. It closed, but my job was to organize it, which we did.
Okay.
And then...
Did y'all get pushback from the Teamsters locally?
It was a new operation. We beat the Teamsters in an election there.
Okay.
And then I organized some other things around Georgia. Canadian dry drivers, tried to organize Coca-Cola drivers, but I wasn't successful on that. And then in 1962 is when the IUD started up. And so I went to work for the Industrial Union Department at that time, because I knew that the brewery workers were about to get gobbled up by the Teamsters.
Okay. And so was there something, did you just not want to be part of the Teamsters? Was there something specific about them?
Well, I'd always been fighting them because of the brewery workers.
Right, okay.
And really at that time, the Teamsters' reputation wasn't the greatest. There was a pretty good mob element, especially in the New York area. And I guess pretty much everywhere with them.
Okay. But were they, at the time, I know now that they're not affiliated with AFLCIO.
They were then.
They were then,
Yeah.
okay.
Jimmy Hoffa was before he went to prison. Or maybe went to prison at that time. I can't recall. It's been too long ago.
So how long did you spend in Atlanta? You were there for maybe 6 years?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And that's where you met your wife?
That's where I met my wife.
And what was she doing there?
She was working for Southern Airways. She was the executive secretary to the CEO of Southern Airways,
Okay.
which then became Republic. I don't know what it is now. U.S. Airways, I think, finally gobbled them all up.
Okay. And
But her degree was in education, but she got through college in 3 years, and she started her practice teaching. And because of our birthdays, both our birthdays were in October, and so we graduated from high school when we were 17. And so, let's see, 37, 89. She's like 20 when she graduated from college. And so she starts practice teaching in high school, and she decided she didn't like that because the boys were more interested in dating her than listening to what she had said. So, yeah, she was a secretary at that time.
okay. So you met her while you were there, and then in 1962 you were approached by the AFLCIO to work with the IUD.
Right.
Okay. And did that require a move?
Yes, we moved from Atlanta to Greenville, South Carolina.
I came through Greenville twice last week. It's Greenville.
Right. It hasn't changed, I'm sure.
And you were asked specifically to work to help with the J.P. Stevens campaign.
Yeah, let me try to explain the IUD situation. When Walter Reuther was president of the IUD, this was right after the merger of the AFL and the CIO, when they set up the Industrial Union Department to give Walter Reuther give him something, anyhow. And so he was going to organize the South, and they picked North Carolina and South Carolina, and they put up about $4 million. And the organizations that were affiliated with the IUD also gave manpower, like the IM had Grand Lodge reps in there, the steel workers had reps, the auto workers had reps, and then the IUD hired people of their own, which I was one, to go in and work in the area. So we must have had a staff of probably 60 people when you consider all the other international unions that put in staff as well as the IUD.
That's
pretty good size.
Yeah.
And we took North Carolina and South Carolina, and also we had an operation in Texas, and a Grand Lodge rep by the name of Steve Williams actually headed up that program, which I ultimately ended up working over there as well. But in the years in Carolina, my specific duty, we had the coordinator was a guy named Jim Pierce. His office was in Charlotte, North Carolina, and my office was in Greenville, South Carolina, and I was the assistant coordinator. And we had not just the J.P. Stevens, but we'd have, like, for the machinist, we had a Grand Lodge rep that would work with us on Stevens, but he also had his own campaigns that we would get for the machinist, and the auto workers would have theirs and the steel workers theirs. Okay. Although we'd all work together when we needed to leaflet or make house calls or so, we'd have people of all different unions doing so.
Okay. And what did you ever find out why or how you were on the AFL-CIO's radar? Did you know why they asked you to come on board?
Well, the brewery workers, you mean the IUD?
Yeah.
Carl Feller was on the executive board of the IUD, and he recommended me. He was the president of the Brewery Workers International.
Okay, I see. Okay. And what did you do going into the J.P. Stevens campaign? Like, what did they hire you on to do?
Well, to organize them.
To organize?
Yeah, that was basically our task, and we had to, start from scratch. We had no leads or anything. We would, hang around the community, find people that worked and go out and make house calls, talk to them, try to sell them on the idea that they'd be much better off if they joined a union. And unfortunately, in the first few months of our activity, we had like over 100 people fired. And so then it got into a situation, you know, with the NLRB, and I spent a lot of time gathering evidence for them and working with them. And we did it. We had some elections. Didn't win many of them, but we got enough to have elections. And we had elections at Dunedin, Piedmont, and of course the one up in, I think it was Rock Hill, where the movie Norma Ray was about. And but I spent more of my time, I think, doing NLRB stuff and coordinating, getting our reps, you know, to all of the different plants for handbills and that sort of. That was a big deal. We were always handbilling because that was about the only way we had to really communicate with them.
Did you find the people to be Okay, so we were talking about handbilling.
Right. That was really our only way to communicate with the majority. We're talking about thousands and thousands of people. And so we may have, and there would be a lot of different entrances, these plants. We may have to have 20 people out to handbill on a particular day, and we'd have to get there, you know, before work and be there after work to catch all the shifts.
Knowing what I know about the South and unions, I suspect this was probably some of the most difficult work you've ever done.
Oh yeah, it was very hostile. In fact, after a while, Congress got into the act because there's so many unfair labor practice charges and things like Jesse Cudd, you know, being fired, and I mean a lot of stories like that. And Adam Clayton Powell was the head of the Labor Committee in Congress, and there was a lot of civil rights stuff too, because if we had a meeting with the blacks to have to be in their area of town in one of their restaurants, you couldn't commingle any of that. And so he sent down his administrative assistant, who was a nice young man, is black, probably never been any further south than Washington, D.C. And so we're late at night driving around, I'm driving him around the boondocks of South Carolina, and he's scared to death. Every time a car passes, he slouches down the seat. I finally told him, says, you don't have to worry about them shooting you, it's me they're going to shoot, because I'm the white guy, you know, bringing you down here. But he got a lot of good stuff. And
do you remember his name?
Pardon?
Do you remember his name?
I do not remember his name,
Okay.
but he was the administrative assistant, I know of, Adam
Okay.
Clayton Powell, Congressman Powell.
Okay. So I imagine people were just too scared to talk to you. Even the people that thought the union would be a good idea for
A
them.
lot of them. But we had some pretty strong-willed folks. But it was an interesting place because I also worked on there's a famous case, Darlington Mills versus the textile workers. It's where the textile workers organized the Darlington Textile Mill, which is a part of J.P. Milliken, not J.P., but Daring Milliken chain. Roger Milliken was head of it. And he told the people when they organized, said, if you organize, I'm going to close the plant. And he was a man of his word. They organized, he closed the plant. Well, it went all through the court system and ended up in the Supreme Court. And they remanded back, and I worked on some of that. But the bottom line of it, the Supreme Court ruled that a company can go out of business for any reason except to chill unionism. And that was a monster ruling for organized labor. And I worked on that case. But Roger Milliken, there's a university in Spartanburg, South Carolina called Wofford University.
I've heard of Walker.
And the biggest contributor to that university is Roger Milliken. Very, very conservative school. Well, I got a call one day from a professor, I think I don't know what, economics or business or something, I'm not sure what, and I don't even remember his name, but he asked me if I would come and speak to his class. And I said, I'll be glad to come speak to your class. I don't think he thought I would do it. So I went over there, and of course I was a lot younger then, but they told me, said, we're not trying to censor what you're going to say or anything, but we just want you to know that Roger Milliken is our biggest contributor. And I said, well, it doesn't mean anything to me. But so I walked in. First thing I did is open up my coat and said, as you can see, there's no knives, guns, or brass knuckles, because they thought we were all thugs. But it was interesting. I spent about 4 hours, had some very good questions from. I don't think I converted one of them, because they were all mill sons and daughters, kids, mill supervisors' daughters and sons' kids. But I think I neutralized some of the bad feelings toward organized labor. I think they could see that, we were people just like them. Our ideology may be a bit different than theirs, but all we were trying to do was help, and through that help, it could also help the community.
Right.
As I say, I don't think I necessarily converted any of them, but they at least were decent to me afterwards. They were a little hostile to begin with, but afterwards they were really nice, came up and had some nice comments afterwards.
So you were there only for 4 years. You only worked in that position for 4 years.
Well, with the IUD in South Carolina.
In South Carolina,
Mm-hmm.
right. And at the end of that 4 years, had you seen any progress, or had you?
Well, they had the one mill organized, but everything was just tied up in the courts. We hadn't won an election. In South Carolina, we hadn't won an election. The mill, now we'd won a lot of elections with the international unions, but not for the textile workers.
Okay. And when you left that specific position to go work as an AFL-CIO rep.
Well, I was still with the if I may not have made it clear.
Oh.
I'm still with the IUD.
Okay.
When I left the Carolinas, I came to Texas.
Oh, okay. So
and I worked.
And what would that have been? 64?
Yeah,
65.
it would have been about 1964.
Okay.
Yeah, 63, 64, I think. And
what part of Texas?
Sent to Houston.
Okay.
And worked there, and we had a great. Well, I loved that, because after all the failures we had, Carolinas, we had 20 elections in 1 year and won 18 of them outright. 2 of them were tied up with the board.
Uh-huh.
So we had a lot of success.
And was it more textile workers, or was it different workers?
that was all. It was stuff, oil and tool industry and stuff like that.
Okay. So the next few years in Texas were successful, and then. But the question I was trying to get out a minute ago was when you left the Carolinas. Well, when you left the Carolinas to go down to Texas, did they bring in people to replace you there, or did they just
shut down?
It shut down.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And anything notable? Anything else other than all of your success about your time in Texas?
Well, in Texas, we had some good things, and actually, with the IUD, it was just a matter of continuing to organize. But then the IUD was beginning to kind of phase itself out because they were running out of money.
Okay.
And that's when the AFL-CIO asked me to come to work for them as a rep on their national staff. And eventually, the IUD just completely went out of the business of organizing.
Okay. And so in '66, you became an outright AFL-CIO rep.
Right.
And did that move you to D.C.? Did you leave Texas?
No, I stayed right in Houston and continued to do the same work. I also serviced, like the brewery worker who was a deluge. We also had some deluges in Texas. Imperial Sugar was one, and that was my service responsibility, as well as organize. In fact, I organized United Gas and Houston Natural Gas for the OCAW, and they became Enron.
Okay, OCAW.
Oil, Chemical, and Atomic Workers International
Okay.
Union.
Okay, and then they eventually became Enron.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's United Gas was Enron's base. That's what really started it. But I organized that, and I was pretty happy with that because the OCAW had tried 4 times in a row and lost each time. And they asked the AFLCIO if they would assign somebody to try it, and they assigned me. And I was successful in that one.
Okay.
And that was a good one. And did that for a few years, just organized around that area. And then that's when the IAM asked me to come to work for them.
And had you made prior contact with them or seen them at
Well,
conventions, or who did you know, going into that?
Actually, I knew a lot of IAM rep because Steve Williams
Mm-hmm.
was a Grand Lodge representative that was the IUD coordinator in Texas.
Okay.
And when I first came to Texas, that's why I joined the Machinists. I belonged to the newspaper guild, Local 2, when the IUD, don't ask me why, but that's who we belong to. But he suggested that I join the Machinists, which I did. And but I knew Steve, and as a matter of fact, that's good and bad because while I was with the AFL-CIO, I got a call from the director of the Machinist Nonpartisan Political League at that time. And he asked me if I'd like to come to work for him, come to Washington. Yeah, that sounds like, a good job. I'd like to do that. And so in fact, he came down to Houston and interviewed me, and he and Steve were good friends. It's a good story, but and he says, okay, he says, you got the job, says you'll have to move to Washington. I said, yeah, no problem. So I go home and tell my wife, said, well, we're going to be moving to Washington, and she's a good trooper, really. And I said, okay. And he told me before he left, said, no, I'll be back in touch with you in a couple of weeks. And, okay. Well, a couple of weeks came, I didn't hear from him. A couple more weeks came, I didn't hear. So I finally realized, you're not going to Washington, you're staying down here. I never did hear back from Don. And finally, I found out what had happened. The president at that time was a guy named Roy C. Miller.
Okay.
And Roy hated Steve Williams.
Ah.
And so Don went and told Roy, said, well, I found a guy to be my assistant. He said, yeah, where's he from? I told him. He said, well, that all sounds good. I said, how in the world did you find a guy working, for the AFLCIO? I said, well, he's a good friend of Steve's. He's not coming up.
Oh, no.
So that's why I say it's good and bad knowing Steve. But actually, there were other people that were working on the IUD that were from the Machinists, too, that I got along with very well.
Okay.
And so that's how the Machinists came to know who I was.
Okay. Okay, so the IAM knows who you are, and you finally got past. So was President C. Miller? Was his presidency just over, or
when the IAM actually hired me,
mm-hmm.
Roy had retired, and a guy named Red Smith became the international president. And Red and Steve they were okay.
Were they both Texas guys? Do I remember that
No,
correctly?
Red, I think, he was from the West, but I think out in, he may have been in Texas, I'm not sure.
Okay.
I'm not sure, but actually, Red was like myself. He wasn't a machinist to begin with. He came out of the building trades and somehow ended up with the machinist and ended up becoming the international president.
Okay. So it was 1970 when you were hired on.
Right. George Watkins was the general vice president for the Southern Territory. Southern Territory had just been revamped, and he was moved from Atlanta to Dallas and he was the general vice president. He called me and asked me if I'd like to come to work for the Machinists, and I told him I would like to.
Okay. And as special rep, did they keep you in Houston, or did they move you up to Dallas?
No,
or?
they actually moved me to, I could have either gone to New Orleans or Baton Rouge, and I chose Baton Rouge.
And that is why you joined the Lake Charles.
No, I was
No?
already a member long before that.
Okay. So were you a member of different unions at the same time?
No,
Or-
once I joined the IM, I could drop my. No, that I belonged to the IM and the newspaper guild until I went to work for the AFLCIO.
Okay. And so how was Lake Charles chosen?
It just happened to be, I don't know. It was just the local lodge that we decided to join. There was no particular reason, really.
Okay. And you ended up in Baton Rouge instead of New Orleans.
Yeah, we chose Baton
Why did
Rouge.
you prefer Baton Rouge to New Orleans?
Well, I had 2 young kids, and I
Yeah.
just thought Baton Rouge may be a little better place to
Oh, certainly.
try to raise them.
Certainly.
And so that's why we landed there. And my assignment was the Gulf Coast. Actually, Lake Charles was a part of it, from Lake Charles to Pascagoula, Mississippi. And I was service, organize, and that sort of thing. And that's how I got involved with the Lytton, because that was part of my service assignment. It's under a metal trades contract. I know it gets confusing, but the contract's in the name of the metal trades, but each craft, which the IM is a part of, and all the other, I think there was 13 different crafts, have their own jurisdiction, and they're responsible to service that group of people. Like the machinists serviced all the machine shop and the maintenance people. The painters serviced all the painters. That's right. And the dues came right to those locals. But the contract itself was in the name of the metal trades. And but I would service our local down there, and we didn't have any problems for a while. But then the shipyard, they built they had what they called the East Bank, which was the old Ingalls Shipbuilding Corporation. Lytton bought Ingalls, and they decided, and they got a giant contract, $1 billion contract to build destroyers. So they were going to build a new shipyard on the West Bank, and that was going to be the West Bank. And everything going along pretty good during construction. But then the company notified the Metal Trades Council that because the contract said that they had to recognize metal trades, the whole thing. And that's when the company said, we recognize the recognition clause and the no strike clause. Everything else is open for negotiations, which created a big mess. So in the meantime, they named me as coordinator of the metal trades as well, which meant that now I had the responsibility of all of the locals as well as my own local there and I was the spokesman for the metal trades with Lytton, and we were getting nowhere, so we ended up having a wildcat strike it was supposed to be only on the West Bank, so we shut the West Bank down. And I told them, under no circumstances, close the East Bank. I wanted to continue because we had a valid contract there. Well, I was out of town, went home one weekend, and so some of my business reps decided they'd take matters in their own hands, shut the East Bank down as well, which I did not want, because now we've got some legal issues because we had a legitimate contract to go there. Company broke the contract on the other side, but anyhow, finally got that worked out, and it was it was some process, and that's what the big book, yeah, that's all about. We had them shut down for a while, but we finally got what we wanted. They recognized all of the crafts and all of what they didn't want, because this is an entirely different shipyard. It was a module construction. The old shipyard, you go in, you lay a keel, you come up with the side plates, and it looks like a ship when they get it in the water, but it's only about 40% complete. Then they have to go in and put everything else in it. This process, you was putting everything in it as you was building. It started out, it was on like rail cars where it could be moved here and there and finally together. And it starts out as a small piece and just keeps getting bigger, 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 but you got it all together. And now, when the ship, actually, they don't even slide off the way. It's on a dry dock. They sink it and the ship floats off, and it's about 90% complete. In fact, that's the way ships are built today. It really is a tremendous concept. But, and requires, instead of the strict craft lines, it requires like an electrician, a ship fitter, a machinist, a labor, and other people all work together. They do their work, but they're composite crews. And that was the big issue, because craft unions didn't want to have anything to do with it. And so it took a lot of work to, in fact, even to get the Metal Trades Council, the international presidents that sat on it, to agree to this concept was really novel. And that shipyard's still thriving today because of it, what we did. And,
it's still organized there?
Oh yeah, well absolutely, very strong.
What were the repercussions of the Wildcat strike, and was it just machinists in those locations, or was
it was all,
it was everybody?
It was the whole group. Yeah, it was the 13 locals that made up the Metal Trades Council. They were all on strike.
And the 13 locals were in both places, on the East Bank and the West Bank?
The Metal Trades, yeah. The contract's in the name of the Metal Trades.
Okay.
Yeah. Repercussions could have been tremendous, but fortunately we were able to work out where there were no repercussions.
Okay.
Now there were some lawsuits, frivolous lawsuits that finally got thrown out, but it was, in fact, the day the company finally agreed with us on our terms to the contract, I called the chairman of the board. What's his name? It wasn't Ash, he moved on to United Technology. I'll think of it in a minute. No, it's probably in there. But, and told him, I said, on 6 o'clock Sunday night is your deadline, because that was the last flight I could get out of Pascagoula to Washington, D.C. And on Monday I had a meeting with the Metal Trades Council, their executive board, which was all the international union presidents that are part of the Metal Trades Council. And I said, if we don't have a contract by then, if you don't agree to these terms, then we're going straight to Congress, and we're going to see if we can get them to get rid of your $1 billion contract and give it to a good shipyard. And he said, well, we'll think about it. So about 3 o'clock that afternoon, I got a call from the local guy. His name was Ben Bourne. He was the IR guy. And all of the spelling and all is in there. You'll see all of that stuff in there. B-O-R-N-E, I think, is the way he spells his name. He was head of industrial relations, but he said, we can't have an answer by 6 o'clock. I said, well, it's your problem. I said, no. He said, we can have one because of the time difference between Mississippi and California. He said, by about 10 or 11 o'clock. I said, well, it's too late. He said, no, we'll give you the company plane. It's your disposal. We'll get you to Washington in time for your meeting. Well, you better not be messing with me or you're in big trouble. I said, no, seriously. I said, oh, okay. And about 9:30 that night, they called and said, okay, we got a deal. And so we all got to get on their plane and go up to Washington, and the next day I presented to the Metal Trades Executive Council, and they accepted it, because it was somewhat unique, because we did have to have the composite crews, and most of the craft unions, that's a no-no to them. Mm-hmm. But they agreed with it, worked out. We came back, got the strike settled, still going strong today.
How long were you in? Special
special rep?
Yeah.
Well, you have a progress in the machinist. You start out as a special rep,
Mm-hmm.
and then 4 years you automatically go to a Grand Lodge rep. But I was only a
see.
special rep for 2 years, and then I went, they made me a Grand Lodge rep.
Okay. And did the work you just described take up pretty much all of your, was that pretty much the work you did when you were the special rep, or was there anything else
Special
on
rep
top?
and Grand Lodge reps all do the same thing.
Okay.
It's just an amount of money you get and a title.
Okay,
But the
okay.
job's the same.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you stayed in that part of
No, in 19, let's see, I went to work for him in 70. 72 became a, do you remember when Rose Spencer became the vice president? I know you interviewed him, I don't.
I did, but I
Well, anyhow,
don't remember.
when he became the vice president, which I
Okay.
think was, well, we got a convention this year. Let's see, it probably would have been 1972.
72, there was a Grand Lodge convention, if I'm counting backwards from 88.
72 was?
Yeah.
Okay, then in 1972,
Okay.
I took he became general vice president, and I took his place handling the board work in the Dallas office,
Okay.
and was moved from Baton Rouge to Dallas.
Okay.
And I did board work for about 6 months. When I say board work, we have a rep that's assigned to do nothing but handle NLRB cases, all their hearings and that sort of thing. And I did that, and then I became his administrative assistant after that.
And administrative assistant to the general vice president,
Right.
Rose Spencer.
Rose Spencer, right.
And was that a year later, 2 years later?
Was it what?
How long did it take for you to become
The vice president?
The
I mean,
well,
yeah.
the administrative assistant.
Oh, it was only after I got, after I came to Dallas,
Mm-hmm.
about 6 months.
Okay. And so your work as Grand Lodge rep, and you moved to Dallas. It was essentially dealing with NLRB cases for the Southern Territory.
Yes.
All over the
Southern Territory.
And did that involve more travel than maybe you had seen previous to that?
Travel wasn't that much more.
Okay. And how did your duties change as administrative assistant?
Well, the administrative assistant is one, you're not dealing with the, you don't have a specific territory, you don't have, you're not negotiating contracts and that sort of thing. Although I did, as the administrative assistant, I was also the general dynamics coordinator. And so I continued to negotiate their contracts and that sort of thing. But generally, you're just doing the administrative duties of the office. You're making sure your Grand Lodge reps and special reps are where they're supposed to be and that sort of thing. In other words, you're doing what the general vice president doesn't want to do, is what it amounts to.
Okay.
But it's just it's more administrative work rather than being out in the field, hands-on work is what it really is.
And was that as satisfying for you, or more or less satisfying, or?
Well, I enjoyed more really being out in the field. That's why I kept the general dynamics, did that. But it was satisfying. You got, because you were at a different level, really. I know if Roe didn't want to go to a particular, like, I remember the governor of Texas was then Dolph Briscoe, and there were some hearings, and so Roe assigned me to go to those hearings, and then there was a lunch, and actually I got to have lunch in the governor's mansion with Dolph Briscoe. That was pretty exciting. But you did more things like that. It was more on it was a higher, I don't want to say higher level, but it was.
It took you out of the shops, and it put you sort of doing more networking or
dealing with the different agencies and bosses rather than dealing more with the members. I kind of miss dealing with the members, but it was kind of exciting up at this level too.
Okay. I met Governor Briscoe once.
Oh, did you
when I
really?
was in school in Texas.
He's a nice man.
Yeah. And so you were administrative assistant until 74.
No, it said.
Oh, you started in 74 until 94.
Yeah, with a slight break in there.
Okay.
Roe decided, I think it was in his second term, that he wanted a new administrative assistant. So I went back out in the field as a Grand Lodge rep.
Okay.
And I was basically over aerospace at that time.
Okay. Aerospace in the Southern Territory?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. And General Dynamics was the big issue. Lockheed was not that big of an issue.
Okay.
But GD, that's when, I don't know who decided that astronauts were great business people, but that's when William Anders became the chairman of the board of General Dynamics. And his whole claim to fame is that he destroyed the company because it was the physical assets were worth more to the shareholders in the company itself. So he just dismantled, that's when Lockheed bought the Fort Worth division of General Dynamics. So they had a big facility in San Diego. They had facilities all over, and then the big facility in Fort Worth, Texas. And he just got rid of all of them.
Was that in the 80s?
Mm-hmm.
Well, then one is also reminded perhaps of Frank Borman and Eastern Airlines.
Yeah, Frank Borman and Eastern. That's why I say I don't know why everyone thought an astronaut was good for business, because all they did is put him out of business. Mm-hmm. Although Borman, we had the strike, with Borman, but then Frank Lorenzo,
who had been in charge of Texas Air.
Right.
Did y'all ever deal with him when he was in Texas?
Absolutely. And but then he bought Eastern, and that was the end of it.
Mm-hmm.
They dismantled Eastern.
Mm-hmm. So, being in charge of aerospace in the Southern Territory, you did have dealings with Frank Lorenzo. Can you talk a little about...
Have what?
Or did you ever deal with Frank Lorenzo as...
I did not. No, that was Air Transport, which is a different thing. That's like John Peter Paul you're going to talk to, and William Sherry.
Uh-huh.
That was under theirs. Although I did work for Peter Paul for whatever reason. I guess he thought I was a good judge. If they had have a hearing or something, I got to conduct those. And I also did some contracts for him down in the Caribbean. But the aerospace, the manufacturing is under one set of vice presidents. Mm-hmm. The air transportation is under another set, and that's like John Peter Paul and Bill Sherry.
Okay. And during the 80s too, I'm wondering, I'm always curious about, because the PATCO strike had such a huge impact on organized labor, the way things ended with the Reagan administration. Mm-hmm. What were sort of in the Southern Territory, or with because with DFW being right there and it being such a, did y'all have any interaction with the PATCO strikers, or?
No, obviously we supported them, but the best we could, but that was about it.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And did the Eastern strike have an effect?
Eastern?
Like later in the 80s, in 89, with the Eastern strike.
Eastern was ours.
So how did y'all feel the effects of that in the Southern Territory?
Well, it was pretty big, because Miami was a big operation, and we had a lot of members there, and in fact some of those that we found jobs for in other industries, but it was a big effect on us, even though that membership wasn't directly charged to the Southern Territory. That was membership and those numbers went to the air transportation group. But we had a lot of residual stuff around there that it certainly did affect, big time.
Anything else? So you had to break an administrative assistant and went back to being a Grand Lodge rep.
Yeah, and then when Ed House became the vice president for the Southern Territory,
Okay.
he asked me to come back as the administrative assistant.
Okay.
And I did, and I stayed there as the administrative assistant with Ed House until George Kirkus asked me to come and be his executive assistant at headquarters.
Okay. And under Ed House, were you doing the same kinds of things that you'd been doing previously, or were there any new sort of issues of note or
Well, I
responsibilities?
No, I continued, the aerospace stuff, but Ed and I worked pretty close as a team, and we scoured the Southern Territory pretty much, and wherever there were problems, we'd show up. If there wasn't a problem, we'd show up. But we worked really good as a team, Ed and I did. And Ed was a good man.
He's sort of how we got these interviews started, because I know his niece's husband through my archives time in Texas.
Oh, is that right?
And my friend John suggested that I interview, when I got this job, that I interview Ed House, and I mentioned it to Charlie McAuliffe. I'm sure you know Charlie.
Yeah, sure.
And he was like, well, why don't we interview everybody? So Ed House is sort of how all
He
of this
got it all
got started.
started,
Yeah,
yeah.
whether he was not directly responsible, but
Yeah.
he got it all started.
Yeah.
And so it was in '94 that you moved on up to D.C. finally to work with President Hophaus.
Right.
Okay.
And
And you were executive assistant to
Yeah,
him?
they changed the title to chief of staff now.
Okay.
But they're all the same.
Yeah. and you were there until your retirement.
Right.
So what was that work like?
Oh, it was great. It was,
Well,
it was a different level.
Mhm.
You're now dealing with more government. I know, setting in with meetings with cabinet members, the president's cabinet, and trying to tell them what they ought to be doing and what they're doing wrong. No, it was really exciting.
In
Lot-
'94 to 2000 would have been the Clinton years.
Clinton, right?
Okay.
Yeah, it sure was. In fact, we got to go to his inauguration and all of that. But a lot of meeting with government and high business people. A lot of international travel. Went to Japan, China, Europe several times.
And it was on behalf of
The IAM.
the IAM to just do outreach to.
Well, the China trip was an aerospace situation with Boeing. It was a joint Boeing IAM trip because we were constantly beating Boeing up because of the outsourcing they were doing to China. And they kept telling us it's just low tech work. It's nothing that means anything to us. It's just something. And Boeing is China. Boeing set up all of China's aerospace industry or air transportation industry, and it was a big deal that they have a little work there. And so they wanted to show us that it was not meaningful stuff. And so there was about, it must have been about 15 of us, Robert Thayer was vice president. I went as representing the international president. Lee Pearson was another vice president. And then we had business reps from Boeing and General Dynamics in Fort Worth and Lockheed, various places. I think there was 14 or 15 of us that went on the China trip, and we were there for about 2 weeks, and we traveled to all the different aerospace facilities that Boeing had subcontracted work to. And that was really, really interesting. Back then, that was probably 12, 14 years, a bit more than 12, probably about 14, 15 years ago. And that was before the auto revolution really hit China, and it was all bicycles. In fact, we started leaving one of the plants about quitting time, and our interpreter said, "We need to wait a minute." Why? He said, "Have you ever seen 14,000 people leave on bicycles?" I said, "No," and what a sight that was. But I'll tell you, within a few minutes, they were gone.
They were
couldn't,
gone?
Couldn't see where they went. They were gone. But that was the type of things that job entailed. And I'd represent the international president at various meetings that he was unable to attend. And when he was out of the office, then everything, then it would be up to me to make sure things continue to run like they should. So
Okay.
it was an exciting time.
And NAFTA, though, was one of Clinton's big projects when he was.
Oh yeah.
And did y'all were y'all ever consulted about NAFTA, or did y'all provide him with feedback about what you thought about it, or? Because I imagine that was a really big deal for
in fact,
unions.
we had the Space Center down here in Florida
Uh-huh.
was organized by us, and we've had all
Bill
kinds
Ussery,
of
I think, was involved
Pardon?
with that. Bill Ussery, does that name ring a bell to
Oh
you?
yeah, Bill, a good friend of mine. Bill
Oh.
was one of the guys that helped organize
Mhm.
Frankie Dalgo and Bill Ussery. Frankie Dalgo did all the work, and Bill got all the credit. Frank.
I will
rest
say
his
that to
soul,
Mr.
too.
Ussery the next time I see him.
You tell him that. Tell him I said so. Yeah, Bill. Bill and I are good friends, but yeah, we have had so much input with NASA. I just wish they would have listened to us more, and we're still in the business. But a funny story about when John Glenn, his last time when he was a senator, went up in space. Well, Tom and I, Tom Buffenbarger, I think it was just Tom and I, and my wife came with us, and the pilots flew us down here, and we went to that liftoff, and we had VIP tickets, which got us in. We were with, and of course Ted Kennedy was there, and a bunch of people, and I told my wife, I said, "I'm sorry, we don't have a ticket for you. I don't know. You're just going to have to." And one of the pilots' wives came down too. I said, "You guys are just going to have to wait, but you can see it from, and you can see it from all over here."
Yeah.
And the pilot said, "Don't worry about it. We'll take care of things." So we go, and we're there all afternoon, and it was a great lift off and all. That was like the third one I'd seen. And so when we come back and we meet up with the pilots and my wife, say, "Well, what'd you guys do?" I said, "Well, we went with the Clintons to the liftoff." I said, "Yeah, sure you did." I said, "Seriously?" I said, "You're kidding me." I said, "And we're down here, and there's a big tall building where the, like, presidents, and other, I don't know, don't ask me how they got up there, but they watch it from up on top of that building. But somehow, I don't know, one of the pilots had some in, and they got up on the top, and they were up with Bill and Hillary Clinton, and of course there's a lot of other people up there. They went through it, but they were watching from up there while we were down here way away. They had better seats than we did. But those were the kind of things that as an executive assistant or chief of staff that you do. And you're basically the voice of the international president in that job when he sends you out to these various areas.
Then that must be a lot of pressure.
I don't know.
You
It's
don't
a lot
know?
of fun to me.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Okay. Let's go back to NAFTA, because I had asked you a little bit about that before you told that story. How did the IAM approach that? were you able to provide the president with feedback about what he was trying to do with NAFTA, or were unions consulted, or?
In fact, going back, the Clinton administration was good for NASA. I mean, they were very progressive, which is what we liked. And the people at NASA, not necessarily from the administration, but the NASA people themselves had good dialogue with our people that were the ones that were in charge of those areas. And we had a pretty good relationship with them. What a lot of people don't realize, NASA's this entity here. It's a part of the government, but it subcontracts all the rest of this stuff out. And that's where more problems are with the subcontractors. Like if there's a strike, it isn't necessarily against NASA, it's against Lockheed, or it's against McDonnell Douglas, or it's against one of these subcontractors. But NASA, we always had a pretty good relationship with NASA.
Okay. I'm sorry. NAFTA, the North American Free Trade Agreement.
Oh, NAFTA, that's a little different.
I am so sorry.
That's a little different.
Because we were talking about one and they sounded like, my apologies.
No, we had big arguments with the Clinton administration on NAFTA, big arguments. And the arguments are still going on. Yeah, we're not at all favor of, as a matter of fact, we took a group of people down to just south of San Diego, Tijuana, where they have the Maquiladora program. That was all a part of NAFTA, where there was these shops set up right across the border that were like RCA, Bendix, name all the big American companies. They have these beautiful shops set up down there. And to show, there's a professor in California, what's his name? Harley Shanken?
I'm not familiar.
I'll think of it in a minute. But anyhow, he deals with labor sources at, I think it's UCLA. And he was sort of our guide. But you go down there and you look at what these plants have done for these people. And they live in the worst conditions you could possibly imagine. And all it's doing is giving, cheap labor to all of these companies that really don't need it, but, they're certainly going to take it. And I don't know that no one's shown me yet today where NAFTA or the newest ones, what is the one they're coming up with now, TTF or something, I don't know, I forget the name of it, but where we've gained by it. We haven't gained anything that I can see. And so we were at constant odds with, but Clinton felt very strongly about it that, and I'm sure in his mind, he felt that this is going to mean more American jobs and higher paying American jobs, because the jobs that we're sending out are, not necessarily the highest paying jobs in the country, but they're a whole lot better than what we got now in some places. But yeah, we had continuous battles with he and his cabinet over there.
Were they responsive to a certain degree, or were they just so dead set on doing it?
They would try to convince us that they were right and that we were wrong, and we would try just as hard to convince them they were wrong and we were right. But it was just like going back to the deregulation of the airlines. And we said...
And that was the late 70s?
Yeah. We said back then it's going to destroy, the flying public. It's going to cost them through the nose. And, look what's happening today, and it is. And it's not through yet. And American's probably going under. It's going to be U.S. Air and American. They'll probably keep the name. But, and look at all the airlines that have gone by the wayside because of it. And,
when District Lodge 143 closed, they sent all their records, and they felt the direct effects of all the mergers and things like that.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I remember Braniff around, Texas, and when deregulation came, said, we're either going to be the biggest or we're going broke, and they went broke.
And Eastern went down?
Yeah.
And Delta still does okay, I guess.
Who?
Delta.
Well, because of all the mergers, yeah. But you're going to end up, just like we said, you're going to end up with, you're going to have 3 or 4 major airlines. That's it. And really, the cities, doesn't bother the cities much other than the cost. But the people it really hurts are the smaller communities that had air service. And now, even the commuters like American Eagle is going out of business now. And they're losing. So, NAFTA and deregulation hasn't, well, same way with deregulation in the trucking industry. When that happened, your major carriers, like the one my dad worked for, Denver and Chicago, they went out of business. Pacific International went out of business. Most all of Transcontinental, I think, went out of business. They can say what they want, but I don't see where, NAFTA or all the deregulating all these industries is a good idea. But then they say I'm a dinosaur too, so we'll see. But so far, I think I've been right.
Yeah, sounds like. Are there any other reflections about your time as executive assistant that you'd like to share, or?
Well, there's so much about, organized labor and working for it. Titles are great, and being in high positions are great, in the fact that you get to meet a lot of really interesting people. But I think the really thing that gives someone that works for the labor movement, makes them feel good, is looking back, especially after you retire, is being able to look back and see what you've been able to do for a lot of people that have had a pretty good life because of either your skill at the negotiating table, or you were able to convince them that they should join a union and participate. I think anyone from the international president down would tell you that, that's being in a high position is great, and it gives you a lot of prestige, but the knowledge that you've been able to make a difference in so many people's lives, I think, is the thing that really keeps people in the labor movement going. And I don't think you'd get into the labor movement if you're just looking for, big positions, big pay, and that sort of thing.
Right.
I think you have to have it in your heart that you really, truly want to help people, and you want to be able to do something good for people.
It probably will not surprise you to hear that every single person we've interviewed has said that.
Yeah.
Every single machinist that we've interviewed.
Well, I think people in the labor movement are a unique group. I mean, you have people highly educated, you have people that never even finished high school. But you get a real education with, when you're in the labor movement. I know I've been to the George Meany Institute, been to the University of Wisconsin, been to our own Placid Harbor, and you get a real education. I remember I wrote the first, the only white paper for the IMH, what do they call it now? Lord, my mind's losing me. High performance work. We got a department for it, headquarters. I don't even know what they call it now. HPWO, something like that. Yeah, high performance work organizations. Back in the, I guess the late 70s, early 80s, when all the companies were saying, okay, we need this team concept. Well, the machinists, to a degree, agreed that we need to make some changes in the old structure of our assembly lines because technology was changing, that sort of thing. So George Kirkus then was the international president. He asked, and Ed was the vice president at headquarters at House, and so they asked me to come up with a plan for the IM and dealing with the high performance work organizations. And that's one of the reasons that I was in Finland. After I put together this paper, I they wanted me to present it to the ILO, the International Labor Organization. But again, I think people in the labor movement are a lot more progressive than what the public thinks they are. We're able to look at situations and say, well, our old rule here just doesn't work. It's time that we make a little change here. And
do you still have that paper by any chance? Do you still have a copy of it laying around?
I'm sure the IAM still has it.
Okay.
I don't know if I do.
I'll look around for it at the archives.
Yeah, because it was the original. Then from that came our high performance work organization, which we have right now. I don't know, Bruce Olson, I think, is over that.
Okay.
But
Sorry to interrupt you.
Pardon?
Sorry to interrupt you.
Oh, no, that's all right. That all came about, I think, in the late 70s, early 80s. It's when the dimming, everybody was talking about dimming, and he's the guy that during Second World War put together our assembly lines for mass production. And pretty interesting old guy. He's dead now, but his book was pretty interesting.
You've talked about a lot of people during your interview. Is there anyone that stands out as being a particularly good mentor or good friend, or somebody you counted on to help you through tough decisions? Because I found within a lot of the interviews that there were people that said, oh, I came in under this person and they were great because they really showed me what it was about and what we were really working for. And are there a few people you'd like to mention perhaps that were important? And you've mentioned some folks along the way, but...
Well, I think there were probably a lot. I mean, I think in life you don't get anywhere unless you try to tailor yourself after somebody, or you hear somebody, or somebody takes a particular liking to you and likes what you do. Obviously, my dad was, probably major. Let's see. Of course, Steve Williams, who's still alive, by the way, he's like 95 years old. Still kicking. He was the Grand Lodge rep. He and I had a lot of discussions and thought a lot alike. But before that, Carl Feller, who was president of the Brewery Workers International Union, a good guy. Let's see. Obviously, George Kerpus, I thought a lot of it. Tommy Buffenbarger, I was executive assistant for both of them. And Ed House, Ed and I kind of grew up together. He came on, the machinist staff a little before I did, but Ed was a machinist came out of a paper mill, and he was a machinist forever. But Ed and I were great friends from the time that we first came on, and but there's so many, it's hard to tell. I was fortunate, had a great career. We did some exciting things that most people can only dream of. Met people that. Of course, doesn't mean much after you meet them, but just the fact that you know who they are. It was just a wonderful ride. But what I enjoyed the most, I think, in the labor movement was the challenge that was presented to you, almost an insurmountable challenge in some cases. Just like at Lytton, after we got that contract settled, then the next big issue was to settle the Department of Justice, the Navy. Who else? Somebody else had suits against the Metal Trades Council and Lytton, all dealing with what they call the affected class. The affected class basically the blacks down there. And I got to tell you, in southern Mississippi, in the mid-1970s and early 70s, they can say what they want, but it was as segregated as you could possibly get. In fact, the only union that the blacks belonged to down there was the laborers. And
Was that for like poultry and fish and stuff?
well, they would do the dirty work in the shipyard.
Oh, I see.
And all of the other crafts, the electricians, the plumbers, the machinists, all, they were all white. There wasn't a black member. And each craft had their own seniority. So even if they were to hire a black, he'd be at the bottom of the seniority list. Excuse me. So, as I say, the Department of Justice, all the rest of the people were suing us because we wouldn't integrate blacks into the other unions. And so everyone said it's an impossible situation. But I got the company to agree that give us a chance to try to find a settlement to this. And so, make a long story short, I got with all the other organizations, and we sat down, and we worked out a settlement that allowed blacks, the senior blacks from the laborers, to pick whatever craft they wanted, whether it be the machinists, whether it be pipe fitters, electricians, whatever. And we broke down the numbers, and they said in the suit, it came up that they had to have 5 go from laborers into every other craft. So every other craft, I got them to agree to take 5 black people, give them, not only take them, but give them super seniority so that they wouldn't be laid off. They wouldn't be at the bottom of the list. And we pulled it off. And everybody said you can't do it in southern Mississippi. But we did. We got it, and they agreed to it, and today they're still living by it. And now the entire, if you're black and you want a job and a machinist, you got it, Doesn't make any difference. And I think that was a remarkable thing to happen in southern Mississippi back in the 70s.
Absolutely.
But you're able to, do a lot of things like that when you're in the labor movement. You're presented with a new challenge every day, and you don't have a book on how to do it. You gotta dig down in your own resources, or call somebody that that may have had this particular situation, and try to find a remedy to it. But it's amazing.
Anything else?
Well, there's a lot else, but it would take forever to say it. But no, I think that's probably about it.
Okay. Well, it looks like we've got about a little over 2 hours of interview this morning, which is very good. And I have really enjoyed this. Thank you so much for agreeing and for traveling so far to meet me here in Lady Lake, Florida for this interview. I do appreciate your time.
Well, I enjoyed it. I'm glad somebody's interested.
Everybody's interested. This is going to be the best oral history project we've done at the archive. So thank you for being part of it.